The morning sky over Kithara was the color of dried blood. Smoke still rose from the ruins of what had once been the greatest city on the planet. Jiho Kim crawled through the rubble, his small hands searching for anything useful among the broken stones and twisted metal. His sister Nari followed close behind him. She was only 12, but the war had aged her face beyond her years. Her clothes were torn and dirty, just like everyone else in the refugee camps. She carried a small bag made from scraps of cloth, hoping to find food or medicine. "Be quiet," Jiho whispered to her. "The patrol will come soon." They both knew the daily routine. Every morning at the same time, Vorthak soldiers would march through the ruins. They would count the survivors and give out the small portions of food that kept everyone barely alive. Anyone caught outside their assigned area would be punished. Or worse, the Vorthak had arrived 2 years ago. Their massive ships had blocked out the sun for days. The Kitharan military had fought bravely, but it was like trying to stop an ocean with a wall made of sand. Within weeks, every major city was destroyed. Within months, the government had collapsed completely. Now the Kitharans lived in camps made of whatever materials they could find. Torn sheets hung between broken walls to create some privacy. Old containers served as homes for entire families. The lucky ones had found pieces of metal to make roofs that kept out most of the rain. Jiho found a small piece of fruit that had been missed by previous scavengers. It was brown and soft, but it was still food. He put it carefully in his bag and kept searching. Every piece of food meant another day of survival. "Jiho, look." Nari pointed toward a building that had only partially collapsed. Inside the broken structure, they could see movement. Someone else was searching through the debris. As they got closer, they recognized the bent figure of Elder Minho Park. Before the war, he had been a respected leader in their city. Now he looked like any other survivor, thin and tired. "Elder Park," Jiho called softly. The old man looked up. His eyes were empty of hope. "Children, you should not be here. If the Vorthak find you outside the camp boundaries, they will make an example of you." "We need food," Nari said simply. "The portions they give us are getting smaller." Elder Park nodded sadly. He understood. Everyone in the camps was slowly starving. The Vorthak gave them just enough to keep them alive, but not enough to give them strength to resist. "I remember when this building was the central library," Elder Park said, looking around at the broken walls. "Children your age would come here to learn about other worlds, other peoples. We thought knowledge would protect us. We thought our culture was strong enough to survive anything." He picked up a burned book and let the pages crumble through his fingers. "We were wrong. The Vorthak do not just conquer bodies. They crush spirits. They destroy hope itself." The sound of heavy boots on stone made them all freeze. The morning patrol was coming early today. Jiho grabbed Nari's hand and they crouched behind a fallen beam. Elder Park did not bother to hide. He seemed too tired to care anymore. 3 Vorthak soldiers entered the ruins. They were tall creatures with thick gray skin and 4 arms each. Their faces were hard and emotionless. They wore black armor that made them look even more frightening. The lead soldier pointed one of his weapons at Elder Park. "You. Why are you outside the designated area?" Elder Park stood slowly. His back was bent with age and despair. "I was looking for salvageable materials, as permitted by Regulation 47. The soldier studied him for a long moment. Then he spoke into a communication device attached to his armor. "Command, we have found an elder outside boundaries. Requesting instructions," a voice crackled back through the device. "Bring him to the platform. Commander Grelak wants to make today's lesson clear to everyone." Jiho felt his stomach turn cold. The platform was where the Vorthak carried out public punishments. Everyone in the camps was forced to watch. The Vorthak said it was to maintain order and discipline. The soldiers grabbed Elder Park by his arms and began dragging him away. The old man did not struggle. He seemed to accept his fate with the same empty resignation that had taken hold of most survivors. After the soldiers left, Jiho and Nari remained hidden for several more minutes. When they were sure it was safe, they made their way back toward the camps. The familiar sound of the announcement speakers filled the air. "All residents report to Central Platform immediately. Attendance is mandatory. Anyone not present will face additional penalties." The camps were a maze of makeshift shelters spreading across what had once been a beautiful park. Thousands of Kitharans lived here now, the survivors of a population that had once numbered in the millions. They moved slowly toward the platform, their faces showing the same hopeless expression. Jiho found their small shelter and quickly hid the fruit he had found. Their mother was not there. She worked in one of the Vorthak facilities during the day, sorting through salvaged materials. Like most adults, she was assigned to labor duties that left her exhausted and broken. At the platform, Commander Grelak stood waiting. He was larger than the regular soldiers, and his armor was decorated with symbols of rank. His voice carried easily across the crowd when he spoke. "Citizens of this administrative zone," he began, using the Vorthak term for what had once been their homeland. "You have been given clear boundaries and simple rules. This individual chose to violate those rules." Elder Park stood between two guards on the raised platform. He looked small and frail compared to the massive Vorthak soldiers. "Let this serve as a reminder," Commander Grelak continued. "Obedience brings survival. Defiance brings only suffering." What happened next was swift and brutal. Jiho closed his eyes, but he could not close his ears. The crowd was forced to watch in silence. Anyone who looked away or made a sound would face the same fate. When it was over, Commander Grelak made another announcement. "Productivity quotas will increase by 20% beginning tomorrow. Failure to meet these quotas will result in reduced food allocations for entire sections." The crowd began to disperse slowly. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked at each other. They had learned that showing emotion or forming connections only brought more attention from their captors. Jiho walked with Nari back to their shelter. Around them he could see the faces of his people. Once they had been proud and hopeful. They had created art and music and stories. They had built cities that reached toward the stars. Now they were just trying to survive one more day. That night, as Jiho lay on the hard ground that served as his bed, he stared up through a crack in their makeshift roof. The stars were still there, but they seemed farther away than ever before. He wondered if anywhere in the vast universe there were people who still had hope. He wondered if anyone would ever come to help them. He wondered if it was even possible for anything to change in a world where all defiance had been crushed so completely. 3 days after Elder Park's death, the sky above the refugee camps filled with an unusual sound. It was not the deep rumble of Vorthak warships that everyone had learned to fear. This sound was different, higher-pitched and irregular, like something was struggling to stay in the air. Jiho was helping his mother Soman sort through scraps of metal when they heard it. She immediately grabbed his arm and pulled him toward their shelter. All around the camp, other Ketherans were doing the same thing. When unknown ships appeared in the sky, it usually meant more trouble was coming. "Stay inside," his mother whispered urgently. "Do not look out until the sound stops." But Jiho was curious. Through a small gap in their shelter wall, he watched as something streak across the sky, trailing smoke and sparks. Whatever it was definitely not flying properly. It wobbled and spun as it fell toward the ground somewhere beyond the camp boundaries. The crash was loud enough to shake the ground under their feet. Then everything went quiet. For several minutes, nobody in the camp moved or spoke. They waited for the Vorthak soldiers to come running, or for explosion sounds, or for something terrible to happen, but there was only silence. Finally, Jiho heard his friend Hyun Lee calling his name softly from outside their shelter. Hyun was 17 and had always been braver than most of the other survivors. Before the war, he had wanted to be an explorer and visit other worlds. "Jiho, did you see that?" Hyun whispered when Jiho came outside. "It crashed just past the old water treatment plant. We could walk there in maybe 20 minutes. "My mother said to stay inside," Jiho replied, but he was already looking in the direction of the crash site. "What if it is someone who needs help?" Hyun asked. "What if it is not Vorthak at all?" This thought had not occurred to Jiho. For 2 years, the only ships they had seen belonged to their conquerors. The possibility that someone else might have come to their world seemed impossible. But the ship had definitely not sounded like Vorthak technology. "The patrols will investigate soon," Jiho said. "If we go now, we might be able to see before they get there." Hyun grinned. It was the first time Jiho had seen anyone smile in days. "Then let us go quickly." They told Jiho's mother they were going to search for salvage materials in the approved areas. It was not exactly a lie, since they would be looking for useful things. They just did not mention how far they planned to walk. The journey to the crash site took them through parts of their city they had not seen since the occupation began. The destruction was worse than Jiho remembered. Entire blocks had been reduced to piles of rubble. Vorthak construction machines had flattened everything to make room for their administrative buildings and storage facilities. But there were also signs that some life was returning to the ruins. Small plants were growing between the broken stones. Birds had started nesting in the empty window frames. Nature was slowly reclaiming what the war had destroyed. They could smell smoke long before they could see the crashed ship. It was not the thick, choking smoke of burning buildings that they remembered from the war. This smoke carried different scents, something like heated metal and strange chemicals. When they finally saw the ship, both boys stopped walking and stared. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. Vorthak ships were huge and angular, designed to look threatening and powerful. This ship was much smaller and had curved lines that seemed almost friendly. Parts of it were clearly damaged from the crash, but the basic shape suggested it had been built for traveling long distances, rather than for fighting wars. "Look at those markings." Hyun pointed to symbols painted on the side of the ship. "Those are not Vorthak letters." Jiho studied the strange writing. The symbols looked completely alien, but somehow they did not seem frightening. If anything, they reminded him of the decorative patterns his people used to paint on their buildings during festivals. They approached the ship carefully, ready to run if anything dangerous happened. Smoke was still rising from one of the engines, but the ship did not appear to be on fire. Most of the damage seemed to be on the bottom where it had scraped against the ground during landing. "Hello?" Hyun called out softly. "Is anyone inside?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then they heard sounds of movement from within the ship. Someone was definitely alive in there. A section of the ship's side suddenly opened, sliding away to reveal a doorway. Both boys took several steps backward, prepared to run. But instead of a Vorthak soldier or some other frightening creature, a figure appeared that made them both stop in confusion. It was clearly not Kithrin. The being stood upright on two legs like they did, but was taller and had different proportions. Its skin was a pale color they had never seen before, and strange hair covered the top of its head. But what surprised them most was its expression. The creature did not look angry or threatening. Instead, it appeared concerned and maybe a little confused. When it saw the two boys, it raised one hand in what seemed to be a peaceful greeting. "Hello," it said, and somehow they could understand the words even though the accent was completely unfamiliar. "My name is Shung Park. I am not here to hurt anyone." Jiho found his voice first. "What are you?" The stranger smiled, and Jiho realized he had not seen an adult smile in almost 2 years. "I am human. I come from a world very far from here. My ship was damaged and I had to land for repairs." "Human." Hyun repeated the word carefully. "We have never heard of humans before." Shung Park looked around at the ruined landscape and his expression became sad. "I can see that terrible things have happened here. Was this a war?" "The Vorthak conquered us," Jiho explained. "They destroyed our cities and killed most of our people. The survivors live in camps now." The human was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this information. Then he asked, "Are you from one of these camps?" Both boys nodded. "Are you in danger by being here?" "Yes," Hyun said honestly. "If the Vorthak patrols find us outside the approved areas, we will be punished." Shung Park frowned. "Then you should return to safety. But first, can you tell me where I might find the local authorities? I need to register my presence and explain that I am just a traveler passing through." Jiho and Hyun looked at each other in amazement. This human actually wanted to talk to the Vorthak commanders. He did not seem to understand how dangerous they were. "The Vorthak do not talk," Jiho said. "They give orders and punish anyone who does not obey." "They might kill you just for being here," Hyun added. The human considered this information. "Well, I still need to let them know I am not a threat. Running away or hiding will only make them suspicious." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. Heavy Vorthak transports were heading toward the crash site, moving fast across the broken terrain. "They are coming," Jiho said urgently. "We need to hide." But Shung Park did not move toward cover. Instead, he walked calmly to a position where the approaching Vorthak would be able to see him clearly. He stood with his hands visible and empty, waiting for them to arrive. "You will be killed," Hyun whispered from behind a piece of wreckage where he and Jiho had taken shelter. The human just shrugged. "Maybe, but running away never solves anything." The first Vorthak vehicle crested a nearby hill and roared toward them. Jiho watched in amazement as this strange human faced the arrival of their conquerors without showing any sign of fear. Perhaps there were still brave people somewhere in the universe after all. The Vorthak transport vehicle stopped 50 meters away from the crashed ship. 4 soldiers jumped out, their weapons already drawn and pointed at Shung Park. The human stood perfectly still with his hands raised, showing he carried no weapons. Commander Grelak emerged from the vehicle last. His heavy boots crunched on the broken stone as he approached the stranger. Jiho and Hyun watched from their hiding place, barely daring to breathe. "Identify yourself," Commander Grelak demanded in his harsh voice. "I am Captain Shung Park," the human replied calmly. "I am a trader from the independent worlds. My ship suffered engine damage during a storm in hyperspace. I had to make an emergency landing for repairs." Commander Grelak studied the human carefully. Shung Park was clearly not Kitharan, but he also did not look like any species the Vorthak had encountered before. His calm manner was unusual. Most beings showed fear when confronted by Vorthak soldiers. "You will come with us for questioning," Commander Grelak decided. "Of course," Shung Park agreed without argument. "May I gather some supplies from my ship first? I have medical equipment and other items that might be damaged if left here." This request seemed to surprise the commander. Most prisoners begged or tried to bargain. This human was being cooperative and practical. "You have 5 minutes," Commander Grelak said. Shung Park went back into his ship while the soldiers waited. Jiho could hear him moving around inside, collecting various items. When he emerged, he was carrying a large bag and what looked like portable cooking equipment. "Cooking equipment?" one of the soldiers asked suspiciously. "I was in space for 3 months before the crash," Shung Park explained. "Ship rations are terrible. I always carry ingredients for real meals when I can." The soldiers looked confused. They had never encountered a prisoner who worried about food quality. Commander Grelak decided this human was either very brave or very stupid. Either way, he would be someone else's problem once they delivered him to headquarters. They loaded Shung Park into the transport and drove back toward the administrative center. Jiho and Hyun waited until the vehicles were gone before coming out of hiding. "Did you hear that?" Hyun asked excitedly. "He said he was from the independent worlds. That means there are places the Vorthak have not conquered yet." Jiho nodded, but he was thinking about something else. The human had seemed so calm even when facing armed soldiers. He had not begged or shown fear. Instead, he had been polite and reasonable. Jiho had never seen anyone behave that way around the Vorthak before. The next morning brought another surprise that spread through the refugee camps like wildfire. The human had been released. Not only released, but given permission to repair his ship and remain in the area temporarily. The news came from Kitharans who worked at the administrative center. They reported that Shung Park had answered all questions honestly and provided documentation showing he was exactly what he claimed to be, a trader whose ship had mechanical problems. What amazed everyone was how he had acted during the interrogation. Instead of cowering or making desperate promises, he had offered to trade supplies with the Vorthak in exchange for repair materials. He had even given Commander Grelak a small gift, a bottle of something called coffee, that he claimed was a popular beverage on many worlds, but the real shock came the following morning. Jiho was helping his mother prepare their meager breakfast when wonderful smells began floating through the air. Rich, complex aromas that reminded him of the festival foods from before the war. His stomach immediately began growling with hunger. "What is that smell?" Nari asked, poking her head out of their shelter. Other Kitharans were emerging from their shelters too, drawn by the incredible scents. Everyone looked confused and hopeful at the same time. No one had smelled real cooking in almost 2 years. Jiho followed the aroma toward the edge of the camp where a crowd was beginning to gather. What he saw there made him stop and stare in amazement. Shung Park had set up a cooking station using equipment from his ship. He was standing over several large pots and pans, stirring and seasoning what looked like enough food for dozens of people. Steam rose from the cooking vessels, carrying smells that made everyone's mouth water. "Good morning," the human called out cheerfully when he noticed the gathering crowd. "I hope you do not mind the smell. I am testing some recipes using local ingredients." A Catharan woman named Suna Choi stepped forward hesitantly. She was holding her 2 young children close to her side. Both children looked thin and hungry like everyone else in the camps. "Is that real food?" she asked quietly. "It certainly is," Shung Park replied with a smile. "Would you like to try some?" "I made far too much for one person." Suna Choi stared at him in confusion. "You want to give us food?" "Of course. Food should be shared, especially when there is plenty." This statement caused murmurs of amazement throughout the growing crowd. The concept of sharing food freely had almost been forgotten. Under Vorthak rule, every scrap was rationed and controlled. Shung Park began filling bowls with a stew that contained vegetables, grains, and what smelled like real meat. He handed the first bowl to Suna Choi, then filled smaller portions for her children. "There is no payment required," he said, when she looked at him questioningly. "Just enjoy it." More Kitherans approached, drawn by hunger and curiosity. Elder Minho Park's nephew, a young man named Daeho Lim, was among them. He had managed to survive by keeping quiet and avoiding attention, but the smell of real food was too tempting to resist. Shung Park served bowl after bowl, chatting pleasantly with everyone who approached. He asked about their lives before the war, their families, their hopes for the future. Many Kitherans had not been asked about their feelings in years. Then something unprecedented happened. A Vorthak patrol arrived to investigate the commotion. The soldiers expected to find some kind of unauthorized gathering that would need to be dispersed. Instead, they found their former prisoner calmly serving food to refugees. "What is the meaning of this?" the patrol leader demanded. "Good morning, officers," Seong Park said politely. "I am preparing breakfast. Would you care for some?" "I have plenty." The soldiers looked at each other in confusion. No one had ever offered to feed them before. Their training had prepared them for resistance, riots, and escape attempts. No one had told them what to do when someone offered them a meal. "We do not eat with prisoners," the patrol leader said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I understand," Sung Park replied, "but the offer stands if you change your minds." He went back to serving food to the Kitherans. The soldiers stood nearby, unsure what to do. The situation did not fit any of their protocols for handling civil disturbances. One of the younger soldiers stepped closer to the cooking station. The smells were affecting him too. Vorthak military rations were even worse than the food they gave to prisoners. "What kind of food is it?" he asked quietly. "Vegetable stew with grain dumplings," Shung Park explained. "The recipe comes from my homeworld, but I adapted it using ingredients I found here. The flavor should be familiar, but with some interesting variations." Before the patrol leader could stop him, the young soldier accepted a small bowl. He tasted it carefully, then his eyes widened in surprise. "This is very good," he admitted. Soon, 2 more soldiers had accepted bowls. They stood eating alongside Kitheran refugees, something that would have been unthinkable the day before. The patrol leader tried to maintain his authority, but the situation was slipping beyond his control. He could not arrest someone for cooking food. He could not punish his own soldiers for eating. And he could not explain why this simple act of sharing a meal felt so threatening to everything he understood about maintaining order. Finally, he contacted Commander Grelak on his communication device. "Sir, we have a situation that requires guidance. The human prisoner is cooking food and serving it to civilians and military personnel." There was a long pause before Commander Grelak responded. "Are the civilians becoming violent or disobedient?" "No, sir. They are just eating." "Are there any security violations?" "Not exactly, sir." Another long pause. "Continue monitoring the situation and report any actual violations." As the morning continued, more and more people gathered around Sung Park's improvised kitchen. Kitherans who had not spoken to each other in months began having conversations. Children played nearby while their parents enjoyed the first satisfying meal they had eaten in years. And somehow, in the middle of a refugee camp surrounded by the ruins of a conquered world, the simple act of sharing food had created something that felt almost like hope. Jiho watched it all with growing amazement. The stranger had accomplished something in one morning that no one else had managed in 2 years of occupation. He had reminded everyone what it felt like to be treated like people instead of prisoners. For the first time since the war ended, Jiho began to wonder if things might actually be able to change. Word of the humans' strange behavior spread throughout the camp faster than anyone expected. By evening, everyone knew about the morning's events. Some Kitherans were excited, others were suspicious, and a few were frightened that this new development would bring harsh punishment from the Vorthak commanders. Jiho's mother, Somin, was among the worried ones. When he returned to their shelter that afternoon, she was pacing back and forth in the small space. "This human is going to get people killed," she said firmly. "The Vorthak do not like changes to their routine. They will blame all of us for his actions." "But mother, you should have seen it," Jiho replied. "Even the Vorthak soldiers were eating with us." Nobody was angry or fighting. Everyone was just happy. Soman stopped pacing and looked at her son carefully. She had not seen him this animated in months. The spark of hope in his eyes reminded her of the boy he had been before the war. "Promise me you will be careful," she said finally. "Hope can be dangerous when you have nothing left to lose." The next morning, Seong Park set up his cooking station again. This time he was prepared for a larger crowd. He had spent the previous evening gathering more ingredients from the local area, and had even traded some small items from his ship for additional supplies. Haranam arrived early. She had been a teacher before the war and still carried herself with the dignity of an educated person, despite her ragged clothes. She approached Seong Park with curiosity rather than just hunger. "May I ask you something?" she said politely. "Of course," Seong Park replied while stirring a large pot of soup. "Why are you doing this? What do you gain from feeding us?" Seong Park considered the question seriously. "On my world, we have a saying. A shared meal is the beginning of friendship. I am alone here, far from home. Making friends seems like a good way to pass the time while my ship is being repaired. But we have nothing to offer you in return," Hayaranam pointed out. "You have stories," Seong Park said with a smile. "You have knowledge of this world and your people. You have experiences I have never had. Those things are more valuable than money to someone who travels between worlds." Hayaranam thought about this. It had been a long time since anyone had valued her knowledge or experiences. Under Vorthak rule, the survivors were treated as nothing more than laborers. "Would you like help with the cooking?" she offered. "That would be wonderful," Seong Park said immediately. "I could use someone who knows which local plants are safe to eat." As they worked together preparing the morning meal, Hiranam found herself telling Seong Park about Kitharan cooking traditions. She described festival foods and family recipes that had been passed down for generations. She had not thought about these things in years, but talking about them brought back pleasant memories. Soon other Kitharans began arriving for breakfast. But today was different from the day before. Instead of just accepting food and leaving, some people stayed to help or to continue conversations they had started yesterday. Daeho Lim brought some tools he had salvaged and offered to help repair Seong Park's cooking equipment. Soon a Choi arrived with her children and a small bag of herbs she had found growing wild near the camp. "These are good for seasoning," she explained shyly. "My grandmother used to put them in soup." Seong Park accepted the herbs gratefully and immediately added them to one of his pots. The improved smell drew even more people to the cooking area. When the Vorthak patrol arrived for their daily inspection, they found something unexpected again. The refugees were not sitting in their usual dejected groups waiting for their assigned tasks. Instead, they were working together around the cooking station, talking and even laughing occasionally. The patrol leader was the same soldier from the previous day. He approached Seong Park with confusion clear on his face. "Human, what is happening here?" "Good morning, officer," Seong Park replied cheerfully. "We are preparing breakfast. Today we have soup, flatbread, and some fruit preserves. Would you care for some?" The soldier looked around at the scene. The refugees were clearly not following their normal routine, but they were not causing any trouble either. If anything, they seemed more organized and productive than usual. "This is not standard procedure," the soldier said uncertainly. "No, I suppose it is not," Seong Park agreed. "But nothing we are doing violates any regulations I was told about. We are just sharing food and conversation." Two of the soldiers from yesterday's patrol were already approaching the cooking station. They had told their squad mates about the good food, and now more soldiers were curious to try it. "Vargan, you should taste this," one of them called to the patrol leader. "It is much better than our rations." The patrol leader found himself in an impossible situation. His soldiers were clearly enjoying themselves. The prisoners were calm and cooperative, and no actual rules were being broken. But somehow everything felt wrong according to his training. He contacted Commander Grelick again, but the commander's response was the same as before. "Monitor the situation and report any actual violations." As the days passed, Seong Park's cooking station became a regular part of camp life. But more importantly, it became a place where people gathered to talk, plan, and work together. Hayaranam organized a group of Kitharans to help with food preparation and cleanup. Daeho Lim started a workshop where people could repair tools and equipment while they waited for meals. Children began playing organized games nearby instead of sitting listlessly in their shelters. Even some of the Vorthak soldiers started contributing to the effort. One soldier named Thek brought spices from his personal supplies. Another soldier named Vorix helped carry heavy cooking pots. Why do you help us? Hiranam asked Vorix one morning. The Vorthak soldier was quiet for a moment. Before I was a soldier, I worked in food production on my home world. I had forgotten how satisfying it is to feed people instead of just following orders. Commander Grelak received daily reports about these developments, but he struggled to understand what was actually happening. His soldiers were reporting improved morale and cooperation from the prisoners. Productivity and work assignments was actually increasing, but the whole situation made him deeply uncomfortable. On the 5th day, he decided to investigate personally. He arrived at the cooking station during the busy morning preparation time. What he saw there challenged everything he thought he knew about maintaining control over conquered populations. Kitharans and Vorthak soldiers were working side by side, preparing food and organizing supplies. They were talking to each other not as conquerors and conquered, but as individuals with shared interests. Some were even laughing together. The human was at the center of it all, but he was not giving orders or making speeches. He was simply cooking and encouraging others to participate however they felt comfortable. You, Commander Grellick called to Seung Park. I want to speak with you. Certainly, Seung Park replied, wiping his hands on a cloth. Would you like some breakfast first? Hiranam made excellent flatbread this morning. Commander Grelak found himself staring at a piece of warm bread that smelled better than anything in his military rations. Almost without thinking, he accepted it and took a bite. It was delicious. What are you trying to accomplish here? He demanded, though his voice lacked its usual harshness. I am trying to repair my ship and continue my journey. Seung Park answered honestly. While I wait, I am doing what my people do naturally. We share food and stories. We make friends wherever we go. This is not how conquered populations are supposed to behave, Commander Grellick said. Is there a regulation that says people cannot cook together? Seung Park asked mildly. Commander Grellick realized he had no answer for that question. There were regulations about movement, work assignments, and resource allocation. But there was nothing in his orders that specifically forbade sharing meals or having conversations. As he stood there watching Kitharans and Vorthak soldiers working together peacefully, Commander Grellick began to wonder if his superiors had prepared him for the wrong kind of problems. That evening, he sent a very unusual report to his commanding officers. He described improved prisoner cooperation, increased productivity, and better soldier morale. But he also mentioned his growing concern that something fundamental was changing in ways he did not understand. He did not know that his report would eventually reach the highest levels of Vorthak command, or that it would prompt a decision that would change everything for everyone involved. All he knew was that a simple human cooking breakfast had somehow made his job both easier and more complicated at the same time. 2 weeks after Seung Park's arrival, the refugee camp had become almost unrecognizable. What had started as simple food sharing had grown into something much larger and more significant. Jiho woke up each morning to the sound of people talking and working together. This was completely different from the silent despair that had filled the camp for 2 years. Now there was purpose in the air, and even hope. The cooking station had expanded into a proper community kitchen. Hiranam had organized teams of volunteers who took turns preparing meals, gathering ingredients, and maintaining the equipment. But more importantly, she had started teaching classes again. Education never dies, she told her small group of students one morning. It just waits for the right time to grow again. She was teaching Kitharan history and culture to the children who had been too young to learn these things before the war. But she was also teaching practical skills like reading, mathematics, and basic science to anyone who wanted to learn. Some of the Vorthak soldiers had begun attending these lessons too. Vorix was particularly interested in learning about engineering principles that Daeho Lim explained during his tool repair workshops. Your people build things differently than we do, Vorix told Daeho one afternoon. Your methods use less materials but create stronger results. This is very clever, Daeho smiled at the compliment. Before the war, he had been proud of Kitharan engineering achievements. The occupation had made him forget that his knowledge had value. Would you like me to show you how to improve the efficiency of your transport vehicles? He offered. This conversation led to something unprecedented. Daeho began working with several Vorthak mechanics to modify their equipment using Kitharan techniques. The vehicles became more reliable and used less fuel. Word of these improvements reached other Vorthak units, who began requesting similar modifications. Commander Grelak watched these developments with growing confusion and concern. His daily reports to headquarters had become increasingly difficult to write. How could he explain that prisoner cooperation was improving because they were being allowed to teach their conquerors? The situation became even more complicated when Young-Ho Bey made an important discovery. Young-Ho had lost his entire family during the initial invasion. For 2 years, he had survived by staying invisible and avoiding attention. The only thing that kept him going was a stubborn refusal to give up completely. When Sung Park's community meals began, Young-Ho had been suspicious. But hunger eventually overcame caution, and he started attending the daily gatherings. At first, he just ate and left quickly, but gradually, he began staying longer to help with cleanup and preparation. Working with his hands again reminded him of his previous job as a geological surveyor. Before the war, he had been responsible for finding mineral deposits and water sources. He realized that skills might still be useful. "I know where there are natural springs," he told Sung Park one morning. "Clean water that we could use for cooking and drinking. The Vorthak do not know about them because they are hidden in the old mining tunnels." This information was extremely valuable. The camp's water supply was limited and often contaminated. Access to clean water would improve everyone's health and make food preparation much easier. Young-Ho led a small group to the hidden springs, including Sung Park, Dae-Ho Lim, and surprisingly, 2 Vorthak soldiers who had volunteered to help carry equipment. The springs were exactly as Young-Ho had described. Clear, clean water flowing from deep underground sources that the orbital bombardment had not been able to reach. There was enough water to supply the entire camp and more. "This is excellent," said Thek, one of the Vorthak soldiers. "My unit has been having problems with their water purification systems. This natural source would solve many problems." Working together, the mixed group of Kitharans and Vorthak soldiers built an improvised pipeline from the springs to the camp. It was not sophisticated engineering, but it was effective. Within days, everyone had access to unlimited clean water. The success of this project led to other collaborative efforts. Soon Choi discovered that some of the abandoned buildings could be repaired using salvaged materials. Groups of volunteers began working to create better shelters for families with young children. Hiranam started a seed exchange program, encouraging people to grow their own vegetables in small gardens around the camp. Some Vorthak soldiers contributed seeds from their home worlds, creating interesting hybrid crops that grew well in Kythera's climate. But perhaps the most significant change was in the attitudes of the people themselves. Ji-ho noticed it first in his mother Somin. She had been suspicious of Sung Park's activities at first, but gradually she began participating in the community efforts. She had skills in textile repair that proved very valuable for maintaining and improving everyone's clothing and shelter materials. "I had forgotten what it felt like to be useful," she told Ji-ho one evening. "For 2 years, I have just been trying to survive. Now I feel like I am living again." Nari, Ji-ho's sister, had become one of Hiranam's most dedicated students. She was learning to read and write again, skills that had been discouraged under Vorthak occupation. But she was also learning Vorthak language from the soldiers who attended the classes. "If we can talk to them properly, maybe we can understand each other better," she explained to Ji-ho. This language exchange became another bridge between the two groups. Kitharans who learned Vorthak words could communicate more effectively with the soldiers. Vorthak soldiers who learned Kitharan phrases began to understand the culture and history of the people they had conquered. Commander Grelak found himself facing an impossible situation. Every measurable indicator showed that his administrative zone was functioning better than ever before. Productivity was up, medical problems were down, and there had been no security incidents for weeks. But he was also receiving reports that made no sense according to his training. His soldiers were requesting extended assignments to this location. Some had even asked about bringing their families to live in the area permanently. "Sir," his communications officer reported one morning, "we have received inquiries from other Vorthak units asking about the techniques being used here. They want to implement similar programs in their territories." Commander Grelak stared at the communications device in disbelief. Other commanders wanted to copy what was happening in his zone, but he still did not understand what was happening himself. The breaking point came when his engineering corps submitted a formal request to permanently adopt the Kitharan vehicle modification techniques. The improvements were so significant that they wanted to implement them fleet-wide. How do I explain to High Command that our prisoners are teaching us better ways to build our own equipment? He asked his aide in frustration. His aide, a young officer named Kelrick, had been attending some of Deholim's workshops. Sir, perhaps the question is not how to explain it, but why we need to explain it at all. The results speak for themselves. This comment made Commander Grelak pause. His entire military career had been based on following orders and maintaining control through strength and fear. But what he was witnessing suggested that cooperation and mutual benefit might be more effective than oppression. That evening, Sung Park approached him with an unusual request. Commander, my ship repairs are nearly complete. I will be leaving soon to continue my journey. But before I go, I would like to organize a celebration feast to thank everyone who helped me. A celebration feast? Commander Grelak repeated the unfamiliar concept. A special meal where everyone comes together to share food and express gratitude, Sung Park explained. It is a tradition among my people when we want to honor friendships. Commander Grelak looked around at the bustling community that had grown around the humans' presence. Ketherans and Vorthak soldiers were working together on various projects. Children were playing games that mixed elements from both cultures, and there was an atmosphere of contentment that he had never seen in any occupied territory. This celebration, he said carefully. Would it include everyone? Everyone who wants to participate, Sung Park confirmed. Ketheran, Vorthak, anyone who considers themselves part of this community. The idea of soldiers and prisoners celebrating together was completely against regulations. But Commander Grelak was beginning to realize that many things happening in his zone were against regulations, and yet they were working better than anything in the official manuals. I will consider your request, he said finally. That night, Commander Grelak sent his most important report yet to High Command. He described the situation honestly and requested guidance on how to proceed. He also mentioned that his zone had become a model that other commanders wanted to copy. What he did not know was that his report would reach the desk of Overlord Vrex, the highest military authority in this sector of Vorthak space, and that Overlord Vrex would decide that this strange situation required his personal attention. The storm that was coming would test everything that Sung Park and the community had built together. The massive Vorthak battle fleet appeared in Cathara's sky 3 days before Sung Park's planned celebration feast. 12 warships, each one larger than the entire refugee camp, hung motionless above the planet like dark clouds promising a terrible storm. Jiho watched the ships arrive from the community kitchen, where he was helping prepare the morning meal. The sight filled him with the same terror he had felt during the original invasion 2 years ago. They have come to destroy everything, whispered Suna Choi, holding her children close. But Sung Park continued cooking as if nothing had changed. The fleet's arrival does not necessarily mean violence, he said calmly. Perhaps they simply want to understand what is happening here. Commander Grelak received the communication from Overlord Vrex within an hour of the fleet's arrival. The message was brief and direct. Prepare full reports on current administrative procedures. Overlord Vrex will conduct personal inspection tomorrow at dawn. That evening, Commander Grelak approached Sung Park at the community kitchen. His usual harsh demeanor had been replaced by something that looked almost like worry. The Overlord is coming, he announced to the gathered crowd. He will expect to see standard occupation protocols in place. What does that mean? Asked Hiranam Commander Grelak, looked around at the Catharans and Vorthak soldiers who were working together preparing the evening meal. It means all of this has to stop. The cooking stations, the classes, the collaborative projects, everything must return to normal procedures. Normal procedures, Deholim repeated quietly. You mean the way things were before when everyone was dying slowly? I mean the way things are supposed to be according to Empire regulations, Commander Grelak replied. But his voice lacked conviction. Sung Park set down his cooking utensils and faced the commander directly. What if we do not stop? Then the Overlord will restore order by force, Commander Grelak said. He has the authority to execute anyone he considers a threat to Empire stability. A heavy silence fell over the gathering. Everyone understood what this meant. The community they had built together over the past weeks was about to be destroyed, and many of them might not survive the destruction. I will not run, Sung Park said firmly. I came here by accident, but I have found something valuable here. I have found friends. I will not abandon my friends. Vorix, the Vorthak soldier who had been attending engineering classes, stepped forward. I will not abandon my friends either, he said. What we have built here is better than anything I have seen in 10 years of military service. Other Vorthak soldiers began nodding in agreement. Thek spoke up next. The Overlord should see what we have accomplished. Maybe he will understand that cooperation works better than oppression. Commander Grelak stared at his soldiers in amazement. They were talking about defying direct orders from the highest military authority in the sector. This was not just against regulations. It was treason. You do not understand, he said desperately. Overlord Vrex does not negotiate. He does not compromise. He eliminates problems. Then we will have to show him that we are not a problem, Shung Park said. We will have to show him that we are a solution. The next morning, Overlord Vrex descended from his flagship in a heavily armed transport accompanied by 50 elite soldiers. He was enormous even by Vorthak standards, and his black armor was decorated with the symbols of countless military victories. He expected to find Commander Grelak waiting with a proper military formation and a detailed explanation of how the administrative irregularities would be corrected. Instead, he found something that defied his understanding completely. Commander Grelak was indeed waiting, but he was standing beside a large table covered with food. Kitharans and Vorthak soldiers were arranged around the table not in military formation, but in the casual groupings of people preparing to share a meal. At the center of it all stood a single human, calm and unafraid. What is the meaning of this? Overlord Vrex demanded. Overlord, Commander Grelak began, but his voice was shaking. I present Captain Shung Park, the traitor whose arrival has resulted in the unusual developments described in my reports. Shung Park stepped forward and performed a respectful bow. Overlord Vrex, I am honored by your visit. We have prepared a special meal to welcome you to our community. Please, will you join us? Overlord Vrex stared at the human in complete bewilderment. In his 30 years of military command, no one had ever invited him to dinner. People either cowered in fear or died fighting. They did not offer him food. I did not come here for a meal, he said harshly. I came to restore proper order to this administrative zone. Of course, Shung Park agreed. But surely you are hungry after your long journey. And perhaps while we eat you could observe the order that already exists here? This suggestion was so reasonable that Overlord Vrex found himself unable to respond immediately. He looked around at the scene before him, trying to identify the threats and violations he had expected to find. The Kitharan refugees were clearly well-fed and healthy. They showed no signs of the despair or rebellion that usually characterized conquered populations. The Vorthak soldiers appeared disciplined and alert, but also relaxed in a way he had never seen before. Show me your prisoner containment facilities, he ordered Commander Grelak. The refugees live in the camp you see here, Commander Grelak replied, but they are not exactly prisoners anymore. They have become more like residents. Residents? Overlord Vrex repeated the word as if it were spoken in an alien language. Young Ho Bei stepped forward. Before the war, he had been skilled at explaining complex geological surveys to military commanders. Now he used those same skills to address the most powerful Vorthak in the sector. Honored Overlord, perhaps I could show you some of the improvements we have made to local infrastructure. We have increased water efficiency by 40% and reduced equipment maintenance costs by 60%. Overlord Vrex found himself being led on a tour of the camp facilities. Everywhere he looked, he saw Kitharans and Vorthak soldiers working together on practical projects. The improvements were undeniable. The camp was more organized and productive than most official Vorthak installations, but what disturbed him most was the atmosphere. These people were not behaving like conquerors and conquered. They were behaving like colleagues. How is this possible? He asked Commander Grelak quietly. It started with the human sharing food, Commander Grelak explained, but it became something larger. These people have chosen to work together instead of against each other. Chosen? Overlord Vrex focused on that word. Conquered populations do not choose. They obey or they are eliminated. Yes, sir. That is what I thought too. But this human has shown us a different approach. Overlord Vrex returned to the central area where Shung Park was still waiting beside the prepared meal. The table had been expanded and now included dishes prepared by both Kitharans and Vorthak soldiers, using ingredients and techniques from their respective worlds. You are not afraid of me? Overlord Vrex observed. Should I be? Shung Park asked mildly. You have not threatened me and I have done nothing wrong. You have disrupted the established order of this administrative zone. I have shared meals with people who were hungry, Sung Park corrected. I have made friends with people who were lonely. I have learned from people who had knowledge to share. These actions seem beneficial rather than disruptive. Overlord Vrex walked slowly around the table, studying the faces of everyone present. Catharines who should have been broken by years of oppression looked healthy and hopeful. Vorthak soldiers who should have been maintaining strict discipline appeared relaxed and content. This is not how occupation is supposed to work, he said finally. Perhaps, Sung Park suggested gently. That is because occupation is not supposed to work. Perhaps there are better ways for different peoples to live together. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Overlord Vrex had believed throughout his military career. The Vorthak Empire was built on the principle of dominance through strength. The idea that cooperation might be more effective than conquest was revolutionary and dangerous, but the evidence was all around him. This small community had achieved something that the Empire's usual methods had never accomplished. True stability based on mutual benefit rather than fear. Overlord Vrex faced the most difficult decision of his career. He could restore traditional order through force, destroying something that was clearly working well. Or he could accept that perhaps the Empire's methods were not the only way to govern different peoples. The choice he made would determine not just the fate of this small community, but potentially the future of Vorthak expansion throughout the galaxy. As the sun reached its highest point in the sky, Overlord Vrex finally spoke. I will consider what I have observed here, he said slowly. But first I will accept your invitation to share this meal. I am curious to experience this friendship that you value so highly. The collective sigh of relief from the gathered crowd was almost audible. Sung Park smiled and began serving food to the most powerful military commander in the sector, just as he had served it to hungry refugees and lonely soldiers. For the first time in Vorthak history, an overlord sat down to eat with the people he had conquered and discovered that they tasted like hope. The meal that followed would be remembered as the most important feast in Kitharin history, though it began awkwardly. Overlord Vrex sat stiffly at the head of the table, unused to eating with anyone except fellow military officers. The food was unlike anything he had tasted before, combining flavors from 3 different worlds in ways that somehow worked perfectly together. This bread recipe comes from my grandmother, Suna Choi explained nervously when the Overlord asked about a particular dish. But we added spices that Thek brought from his homeworld, and Sung Park showed us a baking technique from Earth. Overlord Vrex chewed thoughtfully. Earth, is that the human homeworld? One of them, Sung Park replied. Humans have spread to many worlds, but we try to learn from each place we visit. This bread represents something we value highly, the combination of different traditions to create something new and better. As the meal continued, Overlord Vrex found himself drawn into conversations he had never experienced before. Daiho Lim explained how Kitharin engineering principles could improve Vorthak vehicle efficiency. Hiranam described educational techniques that could help soldiers learn new skills more quickly. Young-Ho Bei outlined resource management strategies that would benefit both military and civilian populations. But what struck the Overlord most was not the practical benefits being discussed. It was the way people talked to each other. Kitharins offered suggestions to Vorthak soldiers without fear. Vorthak soldiers asked questions about Kitharin culture without embarrassment. Everyone listened respectfully to ideas from others, regardless of species or previous status. How long did it take to achieve this level of cooperation? Overlord Vrex asked Commander Greylak. Less than 3 weeks, Commander Greylak replied. It happened naturally once people started working together instead of against each other. 3 weeks, Overlord Vrex repeated slowly. Our standard occupation protocols require years to achieve stable compliance, and even then, we must maintain constant vigilance against rebellion. Perhaps, suggested Sung Park, stable compliance and genuine cooperation are not the same thing. After the meal, Overlord Vrex asked to speak privately with Sung Park. They walked to a quiet area overlooking the camp where they could observe the daily activities without being overheard. Human, you have created something here that should not be possible, Overlord Vrex said bluntly. According to everything I know about governing conquered populations, this community should have collapsed into chaos or rebellion within days. Why? Seong Park asked simply. The question caught Overlord Vrex off guard. Because Because different species cannot coexist peacefully without strict hierarchy and control. Because the conquered always resist their conquerors. Because cooperation requires force to maintain, does it? Sung Park gestured toward the camp below them. What you see here required no force at all. It began with shared meals and grew through mutual benefit. People chose to cooperate because cooperation made their lives better. Overlord Vrex watched a group of Kytheran children playing a game that included young Vorthak soldiers. The soldiers were laughing as the children taught them the rules. Such a scene would have been unthinkable under normal occupation protocols. But this is only one small camp, Overlord Vrex pointed out. How could such methods work on a galactic scale? They could work wherever people are willing to try them, Sung Park replied. My people have encountered many different species throughout the galaxy. We have learned that most beings want the same basic things: safety for their families, meaningful work, and hope for the future. When you help people achieve these things, they become allies instead of enemies. And when they refuse to cooperate, Sung Park considered this question seriously. That does happen sometimes. There are species and individuals who choose violence over cooperation. But we have found that such choices often come from fear or desperation. When people feel secure and valued, they rarely choose conflict. Overlord Vrex spent the rest of the day observing the camp's activities. He watched the educational classes where his soldiers learned alongside former enemies. He examined the engineering projects where different species combined their knowledge to solve practical problems. He listened to the evening conversations where people shared stories and dreams across cultural boundaries. Everything he saw challenged the fundamental assumptions on which the Vorthak Empire was built. The Empire taught that different species were naturally incompatible, that peace required dominance, that strength came from the ability to impose one's will on others. But this small community demonstrated that cooperation could be more effective than conquest, that diversity could be a source of strength rather than division, that leadership through service was more powerful than leadership through fear. That night, Overlord Vrex made the most important decision of his career. He gathered the entire camp population in the central area and addressed them formally. His words would be transmitted throughout the Vorthak Empire and beyond. Citizens of this community, he began, using the word citizens rather than the usual terms for conquered populations. I came here expecting to find disorder and rebellion. Instead, I have found something remarkable. He paused, looking around at the faces of Kytherans and Vorthak soldiers who waited anxiously for his verdict. I have found a demonstration that different species can not only coexist peacefully, but can thrive together when they choose cooperation over conflict. This community will serve as an experimental administrative zone, operating under new protocols that emphasize mutual benefit rather than simple dominance. The relief and joy that followed this announcement was immediate and overwhelming. People embraced each other, cried with happiness, and began planning for a future they had not dared to imagine. But Overlord Vrex was not finished. Furthermore, he continued, I am requesting volunteers from both Kytheran and Vorthak populations to serve as administrators and teachers in other zones throughout the Empire. The methods developed here will be tested in additional locations. Here Anam immediately volunteered to help establish educational programs in other refugee camps. Deho Lim offered to teach engineering cooperation techniques to mixed populations. Even Commander Greylak requested assignment to oversee the expansion of the new administrative model. Sung Park watched these developments with quiet satisfaction. His ship repairs had been completed days ago, but he had delayed his departure to see how the situation would resolve. Now he began preparing for his continued journey. You are leaving? Jiho asked when he saw Sung Park packing his belongings. My work here is finished, Sung Park replied. This community no longer needs an outsider to help it function. You have learned to work together on your own. But what if problems arise after you leave? Sung Park smiled and gestured toward the bustling activity around the camp. Look around you. Kytherans and Vorthak soldiers are planning joint projects for the coming months. They are teaching each other languages and sharing technical knowledge. They have become a real community, not just a collection of individuals sharing space. On his final morning, the entire camp gathered to see Sung Park off. The farewell feast included dishes from dozens of different worlds, prepared by people who had learned to value their differences rather than fear them. Thank you, Overlord Vrex said formally, for showing us that there are alternatives to the methods we have always used. Thank you for being willing to consider those alternatives, Sung Park replied. Not every leader has the courage to question their own assumptions. As Sung Park's ship lifted off and disappeared into the morning sky, Jiho stood with his sister Nari watching it go. The stranger who had changed everything was gone, but the changes he had inspired would continue. Do you think other worlds will accept these new ways? Nari asked. Some will, Jiho said confidently. And those that do will discover what we have learned. That the strongest foundation for any civilization is not the power to conquer others, but the wisdom to welcome them as friends. In the months that followed, similar communities began appearing throughout Vorthak space. Not all were successful, and not every attempt at cooperation succeeded. But enough communities thrived to prove that the methods worked when people chose to make them work. The Vorthak Empire slowly transformed from a force of conquest into a federation of cooperation. Other species throughout the galaxy took notice and began experimenting with similar approaches to interspecies relations. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that one human trader had demonstrated. Through the most basic act of humanity, sharing food with strangers and treating them as friends rather than enemies. Years later, when historians studied this period of galactic transformation, they would debate the complex political and social factors that made such changes possible. But those who had lived through the transformation knew the real answer. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is nothing more than someone offering a meal to people who are hungry, and proving that former enemies can become family when they choose to sit down and eat together. The age of conquest was ending. The age of cooperation had begun, and it all started with one human who believed that sharing breakfast was more important than winning battles.